The question came to me on a Tuesday evening, in the middle of a very ordinary week. I was washing dishes after dinner, the kind of small routine that usually passes without a second thought. The kitchen window was open, and somewhere down the street a car radio was playing a loud pop song. The lyrics were about making it big, being seen, being remembered. I wasn't really listening, but one line slipped through. I just want to be known. For some reason, it stayed with me. I turned off the tap and stood for a moment with wet hands and a plate still in the sink, staring at nothing in particular, and this quiet question rose up inside me. When did being known become more important than being at peace? It wasn't an angry question, it was just curious, tired maybe. Because if I was honest with myself, I had been living with a low, constant pressure for years. The feeling that I was somehow behind in a race I never consciously chose to run. I don't mean a race for large-scale fame. I never actually imagined my face on billboards, but there was a more subtle version of that dream buried in me. I wanted to be impressive to people around me, friends, colleagues, strangers on social media. I wanted my life to look like it was going somewhere special. Every time I picked up my phone, I was reminded of that race. A friend posting photos from a new country. An acquaintance announcing a promotion. Someone younger than me, now suddenly successful enough to be giving advice online. I would scroll through it all and quietly compare my life to those highlights. It wasn't jealousy exactly, more like an anxious inner accountant constantly calculating my worth. And though I didn't speak about it out loud, some part of me felt that if enough people appreciated me, noticed me, or validated my path, then I could finally relax. That Tuesday, that small question, when did being known become more important than being at peace, didn't disappear. It followed me into the living room while I dried my hands on a towel and picked up the remote. I turned on the television, letting it land on a talk show. It was one of those late-night programs where the set is warm, the audience laughs at almost everything, and celebrities come and go with well-rehearsed stories. It's the kind of background noise that usually fills the room without touching my inner life at all. But this time, something different happened. The guest that night was an actor I had seen in countless films. He was known for playing both quiet, thoughtful characters and violent, action-driven ones. I had grown up watching him dodge imaginary bullets on screen. His name filled theaters. He was, by almost any public measure, undeniably famous. He sat across from the host, not quite matching the loud, hyper energy of the room. He looked relaxed but not eager to perform. There was a softness in the way he listened, even before he spoke. The conversation started how these shows usually do: jokes, shared memories, clips from upcoming projects. The host teased him about his calm personality, about how he never seemed to crave the spotlight despite living in it. Then the host, with a half-serious, half-playful tone, asked him something along the lines of, "You've been famous for so long, people love you, adore you. What do you think happens when we die? What's all this for, really?" The audience laughed when the question came out, as they often do when someone suddenly touches on something bigger and heavier than the room is prepared for. The host smiled, expecting a witty reply. But the actor didn't rush. He paused, he looked down, then up, his eyes softer now. There was no sign that he planned to turn this into a joke. Finally, in a simple, steady voice, he said something like, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." The audience went quiet, not dramatically, but in that subtle way you can feel even through a screen. The host's smile shifted into something more sincere. For a moment, the entire atmosphere changed. The glitter of the show dimmed, and what remained was something bare and human. There were no clever metaphors, no attempt to sound profound. Just a quiet acknowledgement. In the end, what matters most is not who knows our name, but who loves us enough to feel our absence. Sitting on my couch, I felt something in my chest loosen. It wasn't a new idea. I'd heard versions of it before. But the way he said it, plain, unpolished, honest, cut through the noise of that day, of that week, of several years of comparing and striving. Here was a man whose life, from the outside, represented everything our culture tells us to chase: fame, wealth, recognition. And yet when he was invited to distill the meaning of life and death into a single sentiment, he did not mention success, legacy, or impact. He spoke of love, of missing and being missed. I turned the volume down and just sat there. I thought about the car radio and that line, "I just want to be known." I thought about the quiet question that had visited me at the sink. And I thought about the strange comfort in hearing someone at the top of the visible world say, in essence, all of this is noise without peace. All of this is light without warmth. That night, I didn't make any bold decisions. I didn't throw my phone away or delete every app. I didn't vow to become some kind of modern-day monk. But I did go to bed with a different kind of restlessness, one that didn't come from comparison this time, but from a deeper curiosity. What would my life look like if I measured it not by who knows me, but by how at peace I am with myself? It was an uncomfortable question, because I already suspected the answer. The following weeks unfolded like they always do, but with a new layer of noticing. At work during a meeting, I caught myself phrasing an idea in a way that sounded smarter than it needed to be. I realized I wasn't trying to be clear, I was trying to be impressive. My heart sped up as it always did when I spoke in a room full of people. And beneath the nervousness, I sensed a quiet hunger. See me, approve of me, remember that I said something good. After the meeting, walking back to my desk, I heard my own thoughts as if they were someone else's voice. Did they like that? Did I sound intelligent? Not once did I ask. Was I honest? Was I kind? Did I contribute something helpful? It's a strange experience, realizing that much of what you do isn't truly for the sake of the work itself, or for the people it might help, but for the image it creates of you. I didn't judge myself harshly for it. I could see that this desire to be seen is deeply human, but I also couldn't ignore how exhausting it was. Later that month, I was at a small family gathering. Nothing glamorous, just tea, simple food, and familiar faces in a slightly cramped living room. At some point, I put my phone down on a side table and forgot about it for a while. My little niece climbed into my lap, showing me a drawing she'd made, all uneven shapes and unapologetic colors. "Is it good?" she asked, searching my face. "It's beautiful," I said. And I meant it, not because of technical skill, but because of the joy and care I saw in it. She beamed, then leaned her head against my chest. For several minutes, we just sat there together, saying very little. The world outside that room kept moving, people rushing to destinations, new posts being uploaded, news headlines updating. But in that moment, my sense of time softened. I thought back to the late-night interview. The ones who love us will miss us. I realized that if I were to disappear from the digital world tomorrow, if my accounts vanished, if my name stopped appearing anywhere, this child would not miss my photos, my opinions, or my online presence. She would simply miss the warmth of my lap, the sound of my voice saying, "It's beautiful," with sincerity. Something about that realization rearranged my priorities, quietly, without drama. It did not erase my desire to be known, but it placed it in a wider frame. One afternoon, months later, I sat alone in a cafe with a notebook. I had started carrying it around because I noticed how rarely I wrote my thoughts by hand anymore. Screens had become the primary mirror in which I examined my life, and I wanted a simpler reflection. On a blank page, I wrote at the top, "What does peace actually feel like?" The question surprised me. I had been talking to myself about peace as though it were a familiar destination, but I realized I didn't have a clear sense of it. I knew what anxiety felt like, a tight chest, racing thoughts, the constant feeling of being behind. But peace. I remembered quiet mornings as a child, lying on the floor reading while sunlight came through the window. I remembered walking home from school with nothing to check on my way, no notifications, no invisible audience. I remembered listening to my parents talk in the kitchen, their voices low and steady, the clink of dishes like a soft metronome. Back then, I was not thinking about who I was in the eyes of the world. I was simply there, existing, unmeasured. So I wrote, "Peace feels like not needing to prove anything in this exact moment. Peace feels like being enough, even if no one is watching. Peace is when my attention is where my body is. Reading those lines over, I realized how rarely I allowed myself that state. My attention was often split between where I was and where I wished I seemed to be. In the months that followed, I didn't embark on any grand self-improvement project. Instead, I experimented with very small, almost invisible shifts, guided by that list and by the memory of that late-night interview. When I caught myself reaching for my phone during a quiet moment, not because I needed information, but because I felt uncomfortable with stillness, I paused. I asked myself, what am I hoping to find? Often, the honest answer was some form of reassurance, that I mattered, that I was not being left behind, that I was part of something. And then I would look up from the screen I hadn't yet unlocked and notice where I actually was. A bus seat, a bench in the park, a chair at my own kitchen table. I would notice the breath going in and out of my chest. I would notice the faces of the people around me, lives unfolding beside mine in quiet parallel. I would remember that they, too, were likely carrying their own variations of the same hunger. Sometimes I still unlocked the phone, but sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I let the moment remain small and unrecorded, important to no one but the person living it, me. Another shift happened in my conversations. I began to listen more closely, not preparing my next impressive reply while the other person was still talking. When someone shared a difficulty, I noticed my habit of reaching for a story of my own, a way to show I understood, a way to insert myself. Gradually, I experimented with simply being present, offering the quiet comfort of attention instead of the loud comfort of performance. I discovered that being truly with someone, without needing to shine in their eyes, brought a gentle peace I hadn't expected. There was relief in not having to be interesting all the time. Once over coffee, a friend confided in me about a mistake she'd made at work. She was embarrassed, afraid of what her colleagues thought of her now. As she spoke, I remembered my own countless moments of wanting to disappear after doing something wrong. I didn't tell her a story to compare or compete. I just said, "It's painful to feel exposed like that," and let the silence hold us for a while. Later, she texted me, "Thanks for listening. I felt really seen, not judged." It occurred to me that there is a kind of quiet fame that exists in these small exchanges, a way of being deeply known by a few people who matter, instead of broadly noticed by many who don't. And this kind of being known, I realized, is very close to peace. Of course, I didn't become immune to the pull of visibility. There were still days when I would post something and check back more often than I wanted to admit, watching numbers rise slowly. There were still moments of envy when I saw someone else's life appear more put together, more meaningful. But something had changed in the way I interpreted these feelings. Instead of seeing them as proof that I was shallow or flawed, I began to treat them as signals, gentle indicators that I had stepped away from myself again. When that happened, I would return in my mind to that image of the actor on the late-night couch, his steady pause before answering. I would recall his simple statement about being missed by those who love us, and I would ask myself, if this were the last week of my life, how important would this particular form of attention be? Would I spend these hours refreshing a screen, or would I want to sit at a table with someone whose laughter I know by heart? Almost always, the perspective shifted, not in a dramatic, life-altering revelation, but like the slow turning of a dial, bringing something into clearer focus. I began to see that peace is not a final achievement, not a stable state that once reached never leaves. It is more like a series of small choices made again and again, to value presence over performance, sincerity over image, depth over display. Fame, on any scale, is largely about how far your name travels. Peace is about how deeply your soul can settle inside your own life. One evening, long after that original interview, I found a clip of it again online. It had circulated widely by then, turned into short edits with captions, music layered over the audience's silence. People had taken his quiet words and wrapped them in dramatic packaging, trying to make them more striking, more shareable. I watched the unedited version instead. The same scene unfolded, the laughter, the question, the pause, the simple answer about being missed. But this time, something else struck me. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he sat with the weight of the moment. He did not rush to fill the space with charm or cleverness. He allowed the truth to be ordinary. I realized that this, too, was a kind of peace. The courage to be unremarkable in a world that is constantly asking for a performance. Turning off the video, I sat back and let the room be quiet. I thought about my own life, not as a story to present to others, but as a series of mornings and evenings, of meals and conversations, of lonely hours and held hands. How much of it had I truly inhabited, and how much had I observed from the outside, anxious about how it looked? A soft understanding emerged, the kind that doesn't need to be underlined or shouted. I cannot control how the world sees me. I cannot guarantee that I will ever be widely known, admired, or remembered. And maybe that is not the tragedy I once thought it was. Because the part of my life that matters most, the part that will be felt most deeply when I am gone, exists in spaces that cannot be posted or measured. The way I listen, the way I show up, the peace or unrest I carry into every room. Fame, I saw, is about echoes. Peace is about presence. I still live in a world that celebrates fame. The billboards are still bright, the numbers still climb, the applause still rises for the newest sensation. That world has not changed, but my orientation to it has quietly. Nowadays, when I feel the familiar pull to chase recognition, I try to pause, just as the actor did on that stage. I let the impulse breathe instead of rushing to satisfy it. I ask myself a few simple questions. Will this bring me closer to the people I love? Will this help me sleep more peacefully tonight? Is this true to who I am when no one is looking? Sometimes the honest answer is yes, and I go ahead. I share, I speak up, I contribute publicly. There is nothing inherently wrong with being seen. Visibility can be a tool for connection, for good work, for sharing what might help someone else feel less alone. But other times, the answer is no. Then the more courageous act is to remain quiet, to let the moment pass unannounced, to keep a piece of my life for myself and those nearest to me. And in those small refusals, I sense a different kind of strength forming, one that does not depend on applause. Looking back to that Tuesday night, to the dishes in the sink and the radio playing someone else's longing for fame, I understand now why that simple interview stayed with me. It was not just a celebrity sharing a thoughtful line about death. It was a reminder in the most human way that every life, no matter how public or private, is eventually reduced to the tenderness it leaves behind, to whose eyes soften when they remember our face, to whose hands tremble a little when they touch something we used to own. When we are gone, the numbers we chased will not hold us. The strangers who recognized our name will, sooner or later, move on. What remains, what truly remains, are the quiet imprints of our presence on a few hearts and the degree of peace we cultivated within ourselves while we were here. In a world that celebrates fame, it is easy to feel small if our lives do not unfold on a grand stage. But perhaps the measure is not whether the world applauds when we enter a room. Perhaps the real question is much simpler and far more demanding. When the noise fades, can we sit with ourselves in honest quiet and feel, not the ache of never being enough, but the gentle relief of being exactly who we are? I don't always reach that place. Some days the old hunger returns with full force, and I am once again tempted to chase the promise of being widely known. But then I recall that night on the couch, that calm, unhurried voice saying, "The ones who love us will miss us." And I remember that peace is not found in how many people read our names. It is found in how fully we live our own lives, even when no one is watching. And in that remembrance, something inside settles. Not forever, not perfectly, but enough for this moment. Enough to wash another dish, answer another message, listen to another story, and quietly, steadily, choose peace over applause once again.